In today's episode, I'm breaking down what people actually consider deal breakers when it comes to buying an old house. Then I talk with Michelle Bowers from Old House Life. She puts potential deal breakers in front of people every single day, and she went from casually sharing old house real estate listings to owning multiple historic properties herself. But first, I'm Stacy Grinsfelder, and you're listening to True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. So nice to have you here. I've got a great show for you today, but before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Sutherland Wells, Brouns & Co. Linseed Oil Paint, Heritage Supply Co., and Repaint Studios. True Tales from Old Houses would not happen without them, and I am so grateful to have them on board. Please shop with confidence, use our coupon codes, and feel very comfortable that you are shopping with great small businesses, all very old house friendly. You won't go wrong purchasing from them. I also want to make sure and mention that the Wood Window Workshop at Blake Hill House is still open. Those two dates are July 10th through 12th and July 17th through 19th. You choose one or the other. There's also a free skills practice add-on if you want to. That's Monday morning, so you can stay extra and practice the skills that you learned during the weekend. You'll get over 16 hours of instruction, including some lead safety training. You'll learn how to restore a window from start to finish using best practices. And this is all in service to historic Epworth Hall at Silver Lake Institute. Now, typically, this workshop has been at Silver Lake Institute, but we have moved it to Blake Hill House this year because Epworth Hall is undergoing a huge and much-needed facelift. So we had to move the venue. I'm really excited to host you in my cute little town of East Aurora. Built into this workshop is also some social time. So we will do a little tour of my village, and we'll also do what Brad likes to call drinks and hangs. So there is social time. You get to hang out with some really cool old house people. We always lovingly call it window camp because that's what it feels like. You know, you come to do this work in service of the windows at Epworth Hall, and then you meet your people and everybody becomes really good friends and it feels like camp. And then we're all sorry to say goodbye after the weekend is over. As far as travel goes, Blake Hill House is 20 minutes from the Buffalo Airport, and it's about a half a day's drive, plus or minus, from lots of places east and west. New York City, Albany, Hudson Valley. West would be like Erie, Detroit. Actually, Detroit's more than a half day's drive, but that's the direction. So Erie, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, that would be east again. I'm having east-west problems today, but you get the picture. I'm also just 2.5 hours or so from Toronto. So it's a fairly easy drive, a central location from all of those areas that I just mentioned. In the past, one or both of those weekends have sold out, and right now they are filling up. So keep that in mind, and I would encourage you to sign up sooner rather than later. Early bird pricing is in effect through April 30th. And we also have a scholarship application for a steep discount open as well through April 30th. And all of the information about this workshop, everything you want to know about it, is on my personal website, blakehillhouse.com. So that announcement out of the way, all my thank yous. So let's dive into today's topic. Today I want to dive into the topic of deal breakers. I asked a simple question on Instagram and Facebook. I said, if you found an old house for a good price, what would be your deal breaker? What would make you walk away? You know, everybody has a different threshold. Now, I got a ton of answers. In fact, I got way more than I ever expected. In fact, at some point, I just had to stop recording them. So thank you. All of you who answered, you really came through for me, which I very much appreciate. Now, I predicted some of the answers. Looking at this as a big picture question, with all things being equal, most of the answers, they did fall into a few categories. This one I completely expected. The biggest one was structural issues. So many people mention this. Foundation problems, major water damage, systems that are shot. And then right behind structural issues was location. This came up in a lot of different ways. People talked a lot about bad neighborhoods, busy roads, no walkability, maybe it was too far from their jobs, or it was just the wrong setting for someone's life. And then there's a category that felt very specific to this audience. I could totally relate to this one. It was bad renovations. I thought it was funny. Well, I didn't think it was funny. Totally relatable. People would rather take on a completely untouched house than deal with vinyl windows, flipped kitchens, LVP, or someone else's questionable decisions, which honestly, fair. I feel that way myself, and I've talked about it so many times here on the podcast, specifically about the housing market here in Salt Lake City, where house flippers take all the good stuff out and just completely turn it white and gray. I'm with you. I don't want that house either. Now, beyond that, a bunch of other things came up just a lot less often. Some people had health concerns. They were concerned about mold, the air quality, lingering smells. A lot of people mentioned cats. Lead didn't come up as much as I thought it would, but it did come up. And asbestos. A lot of people were concerned about asbestos siding, but not so much about asbestos inside, which I found interesting. Something else that came up, financial reality. They were really weighing the price of the house versus the price of the rehab. That meant a lot. And also the housing market where they would be buying the house and how much it would cost to fix the house in that location. Something else that came up was layout and livability. Things like not enough bathrooms or nowhere to expand, nowhere to put that additional bathroom or nowhere to put another bedroom if they needed it. There was also lifestyle fit, needing access to transit, libraries. There was a lot of mention of certain kind of communities. They wanted somewhere where they felt like they belonged. And then there were people who just wanted a yard, a little place, even just a small yard, a place for their pets or a place for their kids to play. And finally, a few intangible things that people mentioned. No emotional connection, or just simply bad vibes. If they didn't have a connection to the house or that just felt off, then they weren't interested. And I get that. I can't blame them. So I put all of this into a pie chart. Structural issues are the biggest deal breaker, the biggest piece of the pie. 30%. Then the next one is layout and function, and then location, which we kind of talked about. And then the others make up the other pieces of the pie. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting, because within that question, I also asked people to include their life stage. If they were single, dual income, no kids, young families, older kids, empty nesters, retirees. So I could see, or all of us could see, what was really driving their decisions. If you have young kids, the deal breakers are completely different. It's not just, does this house need work? It's, can we live here safely during that work? Is there enough space? Is this layout going to put the toddler's bedroom at the top of a staircase? One person in particular said they needed to be able to afford the house, do the work, and live somewhere else at the same time because they had little ones. And that is a very different equation. That's a lot more expensive. For the dual income, no kid group, the focus shifted more to lifestyle. They wanted walkability and culture and access to the things that they care about. Even political alignment with their community was more important to them. And interestingly, this group had some of the strongest reactions to bad renovations. Because if you're choosing a place based on how you want to live, I guess those details really matter. The singles, they were practical. A lot of their answers were about proximity to job, not being isolated, and having access to community or outdoor space. It was often less about the house itself and more about how it fit into their daily life. And then on the other end, the people who've already done this once, retirees, empty nesters, those that have older kids getting close to becoming empty nesters, a lot of them weren't interested in another massive project. They were particularly nervous about structural issues. And their tone shifts to, I need things to work because I either don't have the energy for this anymore or I want to spend my money in different ways. So what it really comes down to is capacity, time, money, energy, stage of life. The same house that feels like a dream to one person is a hard no for someone else. It's not always about what the house needs. It's about what you have to give to it. I turned all of this into pie charts, all this data from the different life stages and groups, because I am a visual kind of gal, and they tell a pretty clear story. Structural issues does take up a large portion of the pie across the board, but the rest shifts depending on who's answering. And you'll find the charts and a few takeaways over on Substack on Thursday in the newsletter. And if you're not currently subscribed, there is a link right in the show notes. I wanted to start the show with deal breakers because, number one, I'm often asked this question: what are my personal deal breakers? And honestly, at this point, not too much. I've seen some stuff. But also because my guest today is Michelle from Old House Life, who's out there sharing old house real estate listings with over 1 million people. And she's watching this play out every single day. The same house can get completely different reactions depending on who's looking at it. But what makes her perspective especially interesting is how she got there in the first place. From photographing old houses as a hobby to owning and moving historic buildings herself. So after the break, we're going to take this out of the hypothetical and into real life with Michelle. We'll be back. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Sutherland Wells. Sutherland Wells makes traditional finishes for you, today's owners of old homes. Their finishes rejuvenate and protect old wood, restoring its beauty and helping maintain it for the future. Sutherland Wells handcrafts their polymerized tung oil finishes in Providence, Rhode Island, using high-quality American-grown tung oil. And they make their products in small batches in-house to ensure consistency and quality. Now, I can certainly vouch for I've used Murdoch's Hard Sealer for the wainscoting and window in my upstairs bathroom. I've used Botanical for baseboards. I use Slicky Wicky all the time in my window jams. I've tried Teddy's. I've used Millie's. I regularly use Clarabelle's mixed with my oil primer. They're so easy to use, and I am a huge fan. Sutherland Wells products are also low VOC or VOC exempt, and that matters when you're living in your house while you're working on it. To get 10% off your first order, visit sutherlandwells.com, that's WELLES, sutherlandwells.com, and use the code TRUETALES26. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Brouns & Co. Linseed Oil Paint. While modern paints rely on plastics, synthetic pigments, and chemical drying agents, Brouns & Co. creates linseed oil paint the traditional way, using slow-boiled flax oil and natural mineral pigments. Linseed oil paint doesn't form a skin like modern paint. It penetrates wood and metal, protecting from the inside out, just as it did on historic barns, homes, and landmarks across Europe and early America. The result is a finish that ages beautifully. It never peels or blisters, and it lasts decades, not years. I had the same questions that many listeners do about linseed oil paint. Climate limitations, the learning curve. So we answered those in episode 164. And then I used Brouns & Co. linseed oil paint on the windows in my sleeping porch and in 2 bedrooms at Blake Hill House. The application was straightforward and the finish cured to a smooth, durable surface. Using it in a real project, that's what finally made it click for me. I understood why linseed oil paint performs so well over time, making it ideal for historic preservation and perfect for thoughtful modern restoration. Brouns & Co. is trusted by preservation professionals and homeowners who value authenticity. Learn more at linseedoilpaint.com. Welcome back, everyone. As I mentioned before the break, today I am talking with Michelle from Old House Life. Michelle's built a massive following sharing old house listings, and she's spent years turning a few of those listings into real-life projects of her own.
I am Michelle Bowers. I am the founder of Old House Life. It's a popular website and social media gathering place all about old houses.
Hi, Michelle. I am so excited you're here, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know you better.
I'm excited to talk with you.
I have been following you on, I guess, Facebook. I subscribe to your posts on the blog, Old House Life, and they just land in my inbox. And you've got a really cool project that we're going to get into that I'm dying to know more about. So we'll talk about that soon. But I would like to know, first of all, since we do not know each other whatsoever, how did you first get into old house preservation?
My sister, she was 2 years older than me, and she died unexpectedly. I guess it was about a decade ago. Died unexpectedly. And on the 1-year anniversary of her death, I felt like I was still grieving too much of it. And I thought, well, I need some type of an outlet. And when we were younger, we used to drive back roads with our aunt and uncle in West Virginia, just looking at old abandoned houses and old cemeteries. And I thought maybe I should start that up with my kids. And so we would get in the car just like on a Saturday and pull up to an intersection, and I'd say, okay, do we want to turn right or turn left? And each intersection, they could each pick a different way that we would go. And it just started off as that hobby. And I thought, well, maybe I should start a Facebook page for it. And
Hmm.
so I did. I remember I said to the kids, wouldn't it be great if we get like 100 followers? And I remember I woke up one morning, I was like, we hit 100 followers. So we're no longer at 100 followers. And now my daughter works for me. She's my only employee, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
been an
that's
adventure.
incredible. So you were really just you were just taking snaps of pictures of old houses that you were seeing on your basically weekend drives. Is that how I understand that it started?
Right. So it started off as like if we'd see an old abandoned house or a barn or an old cemetery, we'd take pictures of it and try to look up the research and post that. And then it kind of seemed like everybody was doing that. And so
Right.
I started sharing old houses that were for sale.
How do you find those listings? Do you just peruse Zillow or Realtor.com or what? I mean, how do you find out that there are so many beautiful houses for sale?
Some realtors will reach out to me, but I kind of shy away from those because I don't want to feel pressured to post every single house that is sent
Right.
my way. I have a certain criteria that I look for and that I like. I don't want to veer off of that because clearly followers like it also. So I just kind of sit and peruse through Zillow, go through states alphabetically. But I've been
Wow.
doing it so long that it's easy to kind of spot them.
You know immediately what you're looking for. What is your criteria?
No gray laminate flooring. I'm so
I
over that trend. No
yeah,
barn doors inside. No, I mean, I look for original.
yeah.
Because when the house, all of my houses that we work on, we try to keep it as original as
Mhm,
possible. So I get really excited if I see a house on Zillow that hasn't been muddled up. It doesn't have
mhm.
crazy additions or things going on.
I'm gonna throw a little shade to Utah right now, where I'm spending the winter, and say that I bet you don't find a lot of listings here because the number of gray laminate floors and barn doors and gutted everything I find in the listings is so sad.
I've posted very, very few Utah houses,
Yeah,
like very
probably
few.
for that reason. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So, speaking of that following on Facebook, you have far surpassed 100 now, and I believe you are at
Yes.
something like 1.3 million followers on Facebook. Did you ever
Yeah.
think you were going to see 1.3 million followers?
Never, never.
What was your original goal? Not necessarily personal, not necessarily follower goal, but what was your goal with starting the page?
I mean, really, I just did it as kind of like a memorial or a remembrance to my sister. And it was a hobby, something I was doing with my kids that I enjoyed doing when I was younger. And, when they would say just follow your passion or what you love doing. And at the time, I'd been a stay at home mom for 20 years, no career. Kids were getting older where they're going to start leaving the house. And I thought, well, then what am I going to
Right.
do? But
Yeah.
originally, I'd never thought about money. Just, it was a
Just
hobby.
doing it as a hobby. What was
Yes.
the turning point? Was there like a particular turning point in this where you realized, oh my gosh, this is way bigger than a hobby?
It's when I started doing video tours rather than just pictures. So I would still do the listings but then I started looking for a house for myself, like a fixer
Yeah,
upper. And so I would do video tours of houses that I was interested in. And that kind of changed things. And I was getting like thousands of followers overnight. And I thought, okay, there's something here. But back
sure.
then, people weren't monetizing social media or anything. But I had no clue how to go about
Mhm.
that. So that was the biggest challenge.
I agree, as someone who's been on the internet for a while as well. So you turned your interest in photography of these houses into actually looking for a fixer for yourself.
Yes,
And you found one or more, actually. You found a couple, but what was your first one like? What were you looking for and what did you
I'm
find?
sitting in it right now.
Ah, yes, it's just lovely. From what I can see, it's very beautiful.
But at this house, it's crazy because I paid $1 for it.
No.
Yes. So I'm based out of Danville, Virginia,
Okay.
and Danville had a historic district that had fallen on really rough times. There was gang activity, drugs were in here, slumlords, and they would literally rent out every room in a house. They weren't up to code. I mean, it was just a horrible situation.
Yeah.
And so the city came in and told the owners, get your houses up to code or we're buying them at tax value. So pretty much that's what they did. Nobody wanted to get their houses up to code. So they created a land bank of like 50 houses, and they were looking for people who would buy them, restore them, and then live in them for 5 years. So this particular house, it's a cute Victorian cottage with a steep chalet style roof. It needed a ton of work, like it would rain on me inside. So you had to jump over holes in the floor. The kitchen, we called it the dark pit of despair. It had fires and just you couldn't walk into it. And I thought, but it's $1. How could I go wrong with $1? And I remember I bought it for $1 and paid the closing costs. And afterwards I came back here and I thought, what have I gotten myself into? I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I had no clue. I was living in a new house in Raleigh, North Carolina. I had no clue what I was going to do. And so we would just do superficial things like clean up the yard and clean the house out. And then along came this man who bought a house 2 blocks over, and he owns a historic restoration company. And so I asked him, I said, could you come give me an estimate? And he said, sure. And so now we have been dating for almost 5 years, I believe. So now he does all of my projects. And
that was a good match. That worked out really well, didn't it?
Yes. But this house took 3 years start to finish, and we now live in this house.
So that land bank, did most of the houses around your house also sell to people? So the area now is in better shape?
The last house was just purchased, and it's a house right beside me. They just came to the door Sunday to introduce themselves.
So that was 5 years ago that started.
Yeah. And
That's
I bought
exciting.
the other house over here on this side. I got that one for $8,000, not $1, but $8,000.
Wow. Steep price.
That one we finished, and my daughter who works for me lives over there.
That is really neat. I had no idea that was part of your story, but gosh, $1. Do you feel like you got your money's worth?
I mean, I've put a lot into this, and I learned a lot through this house. And then now I can kind of look at other houses that I'm interested in. And even without getting Luke's advice, I'll know, okay, that's just going to cost too much. Now I have some knowledge where before I had zero.
Yeah. That frame of reference. I get that. You're like, I mean, it could cost $5. It could cost $5 million. You know, when you don't have any experience, it's hard to say. Do you, and you did this again. So you bought this house, you bought the house that your daughter now lives in, and then you've done this more than once, or more than twice, rather.
There's lots of houses. So then there's 2 blocks away. There were 4 houses that came up on the market, and it was a private sale. Because at the land bank, they only wanted you to have one city house. They let me buy that one next door because it was special circumstances. But the ones 2 blocks away, it was a private sale. And it was a man that owns like 100 different houses in Danville. So I worked out a deal with him and bought the 4 houses. It wasn't bad though. So the 4 houses, and they're all side by side. It's like pretty much the block or half the block. For $130,000. So that wasn't bad. And the houses there, I mean, they were muddled up, some of them, but they're not in bad condition. And they're in different degrees of restoration right now.
But 4 houses for 130 is not so bad.
Yeah. And then there's more.
Tell me.
So that I've always wanted, we go to the mountains a lot and would always use Airbnbs. And I thought the amount of money I've spent on short-term rentals, I could have bought a mountain house twice, but I wanted something historic. And so there was one day I was looking up, just doing my usual work routine, and this house popped up, and I thought, and it had been first posted months prior, and I thought, why didn't I ever see this? It was the historic Stewart house in Saltville, Virginia. Have you ever heard of Saltville, Virginia?
I haven't. No. What's it like? Or tell me a little bit about it.
We hadn't either. But the house was built in 1840. Was owned by William Alexander Stewart. So his brother was the well-known General Jeb Stewart. But he owned the salt works. So Saltville's known for salt mining. They pull the brine out of the earth, boil it down to produce salt. So he owned the salt works in town. And then about 100 yards from my house there, the Smithsonian was doing an archaeological dig, and they pulled up a fully intact woolly mammoth. So that's 100 yards from the house. When they were building the new high school in town, it's a tiny town, population maybe 1,000. When they were building the new high school in town, they had to stop construction because they discovered a whole Native American village under. So they had to stop that. Then they find all the Civil War artifacts. So my house during the Civil War, it was raided. The Second Battle of Saltville, it was raided, and the Stewart family was kicked out of the house. And my house was used as Union headquarters during that
Wow.
battle. So it's an amazing house. So
Yeah.
Luke and I, we drove from so it's 3 hours from Danville up to see the house. And we get to the town and we looked at each other and we were like, where are you? We felt like we literally described it as the Garden of Eden, like
Wow.
these saltwater ponds in the mountains and like natural hibiscus growing around them. And we were like, where are we? So we pull up to this long private gated driveway and you round the corner and there's this huge white farmhouse, gigantic wraparound porch. Now the house needed work, a lot of work, but they were asking 150 for it. And I thought, okay, this setting alone, you can't
Right.
beat that. So I offered 100, but they they didn't take my 100. But I did get it for 116,000. So that's
Wow.
not bad. Yeah.
What an interesting town. And it sounds almost like the land underneath is almost like a lasagna. You've got the Smithsonian woolly mammoth, and then you've got the Native American dig, and then you've got the Civil
Civil War.
War. And wow, that's so interesting. So now you have a house in the mountains like you had hoped you would have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I read something about a general store. You also own a historic general store building?
Well, after Saltville, you've heard of Edenton, North Carolina, maybe?
I'll be real honest with you. I was actually born in Tennessee. My parents
Oh,
worked in the
okay.
Smoky Mountains, but I was a baby. I left that area and have never really spent any time there. So I am very unaware, really very ignorant of all of that area of the United States. So yeah, fill me in.
So bought a house in Hertford after Saltville. So Edenton, Hertford, very historic area. And it's part of the Inner Bank. So I'm sure, have you heard of the Outer Banks of North
Yes,
Carolina?
that.
Okay.
I'm with you there.
Okay. So this is the Inner Banks side
Gotcha.
of things, but really old architecture, and they're very big into historic preservation in Edenton and Hertford. And so this house popped up one day, built in 1820. I was typing up to do a post about it, and Luke walked in, and I said, take a look at this. And we had always wanted a house somewhere out there. And I said, take a look at this. And he looked and he said, you're not going to post that, are you? And I said, I don't know. Should I? And I thought it would probably be a big post, but do I want the house? And so I have a friend, Susan, that lives in Hertford, and she owns the Inner Banks Inn in Edenton. And I called her up and I said, Susan, I said, what do you know about this? And she said, I know nothing. And she said, but my son is a realtor now, so he can show you. So I texted Luke and I said, you need to leave work. Looks like we're making a trip out to Hertford. So we got out there and there was a couple there with their contractor looking. And I was like, oh, we're going to have to move fast. But this house was so special, though. It's built in 1820. We think part of it's earlier, completely original, like original woodwork, original floors, this grand entryway. And I was like, we gotta act fast. So they were asking 165 for that, which is unheard of price for out there. And so I just said, okay, I'm not gonna squabble over $5,000, $10,000.
Right.
I'll offer 165. So we've been working on that one a year and actually almost finished with it. It wasn't in as bad a shape as it looked.
Mm-hmm.
And then the general store came up. So the general store just happened a few months ago. And again, I was just doing usual work and showed up as lots and land rather than an actual house listing. But it's an old general store from late 1800s. And there was also a cottage with it also from the same time period. And I showed Luke, I said, look at this. They just showed an aerial view of the store. And I said, they have it listed as a barn with no value. I said, that does not look like a barn to me. And he said, no, he said, it could be a tobacco barn. I said, no. I said, look at the door handle. And it was this elaborate East Lake style doorknob. And I said, that is not a barn. And so we left right then, drove an hour. It's an hour from Danville. Drove there and could only look at the outside. And they were asking 50,000. It's like a little over an acre, but they gave no value to the structures.
Right.
And so I was like, well, there's no telling what they look like inside. And everything was boarded up where you couldn't see anything. And I told him, I said, I think we should just make an offer. And so he called the realtor and we said 25. And the realtor came back and he said, I think the sellers know who you are. And so they're saying if you could just give 5,000 more, you can have it. And I was like, okay, so got those. The kicker was that nobody had a key.
How funny.
There were padlocks, but nobody had a key to get in anything. So I was basically buying it. There was no telling, but structurally on the outside, they didn't look bad. And so we were just fingers crossed that there was still stuff in the general
It's like
store.
Storage Wars, you know, that show Storage Wars, where you just buy something and then they cut the little lock off and then whatever's inside is what you get.
That's literally what happened, because we showed up the day of my closing and I said, everybody take a look at my key. And it was bolt cutters. So we cut up, but the store had the original counters in it, original shelving. It was filled up to my hips, just of wood and junk and all that. So it took a long time for Luke and his crew to sort through it. But as they were sorting, they found all kinds of old historic things to put on the shelves. And there's a whole upstairs we still haven't even gotten to. And then the cottage was last lived in 1950s. And so we were like, there's no telling. So again, we used my keys to
those
get
bolt
in.
cutters came in handy.
And there were just stacks and stacks of old newspapers that had never been opened from like 1950s to 1950s. It's like whoever was there was just collecting them for me to find one day, because they're literally like their crisp had never been opened at all. They're old pianos and it's just filled to the brim.
So you've been doing this for a while. When you see something like that, do you think, ooh, that's so exciting, I can't wait to dig in? Or do you kind of think, this is a nightmare, and now I have to go through all this stuff before I can get to the good part? How do you view something where you inherit somebody else's old stuff?
No, that's exciting.
Okay.
Yeah. And Luke, I trust Luke enough, because he's probably the best in the business at historic restoration. So I trust him enough where I'll go and show up with my daughter and we'll make videos of what they've done throughout the week or whatever. And they just do all the dirty work.
Yeah.
And then I make the design choices and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But we get excited. Yeah.
Yeah. It does sound exciting to me to a certain degree too. You know, it just depends, I guess, how much I've got going on, you know, whether or not it sounds fun to have to, you know, rent the dumpster and drag it all out. But yeah, the idea that there might be something really cool in there, I certainly wouldn't want to miss seeing that.
Well, and the only time after every single closing, as I'm leaving the attorney's office and driving to whichever house it is, I always say, what have I gotten myself into?
Okay, so you're not immune to that. You're not immune to that feeling then.
Well, now I think if I ever don't feel that way, I'm going to be like, oh, wait a minute.
You'll need a new challenge at that point, right? We're going to take another quick break, and then we'll get right back to Michelle's interview. True Tales from Old Houses is supported by Heritage Supply Co. If you've listened to this show before, you know the Craftsman Store. Well, Heritage Supply Co. is the same company with a new name, and it's still the very best source for window restoration supplies. If you're stripping paint from old windows, Heritage Supply Co. carries the Speed Heater Cobra and their own IR paint stripper. Both are infrared tools that remove even lead paint without creating toxic dust. For reglazing, they've got Austin's Glazier's Putty that actually cures in days instead of weeks. Their Spring Bronze weather stripping will last 100 years. Trust me, your grandkids will thank you. And if you're looking for all of those parts that seem to have vanished from the hardware stores, you know, sash cord, sash locks, glazing points, parting bead, Heritage Supply Co. has it. They also carry Plaster Magic for ceiling and wall repairs and Abatron epoxies for rotted wood. And if you're ready to learn some new skills, check out their window restoration courses and hands-on boot camps. Visit heritagesupply.com and use the code TrueTales10. That's TrueTales10 for 10% off your entire order. Spend $250 or more and the shipping is free. Again, heritagesupply.com, code TrueTales10. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Repaint Studios. Quick question. What do you do with your paint tray when you're in the middle of a project? If your answer involves a garbage bag, plastic wrap, or a carefully balanced tray on the floor, same. I have done all of it. But there is definitely a better way, and it's the Repaint tray. The Repaint tray is a paint tray with a reusable silicone liner and an airtight lid. So you can stop mid-project and come back days or even weeks later and your paint is still usable. The tray itself is a heavy-duty metal so it doesn't slide around while you're working. And when you're done, you let the paint dry in the silicone liner and peel it out. Repaint Studios is a woman-owned business, and recently they were featured and funded on Shark Tank by Barbara Corcoran and Chip and Joanna Gaines, which tracks because this is one of those why didn't this exist before tools. Grab one for yourself at repaintstudios.com and get 10% off with the code TrueTales10. Well, I would like to pivot a little bit to the Altman cottage because that's kind of that would be one of your newest project that really just came to pass. But the Altman cottage is one of your newest acquisitions.
Yeah, so it's the Alfred and Elizabeth Altman cottage. They call it a coastal cottage, even though it's not near the coast. It was just a style of architecture back then. But it was built in 1840. At the time, it was a huge farm, like 800 something acres. But the interior of it, for such a simple looking cottage, it's unique. Like it has the faux marbled wainscoting. It has an enclosed staircase with paneled wainscoting, amazing doors, mantels. Like it's something you would see in a high-end house. And we're like, why is it in this? And so it was a few months ago, we saw Preservation North Carolina posted that they were looking for somebody to buy it. I think it was $10,000 at the time, but it needed to be moved. The farmer, where it was sitting, the farmer wanted that land. They couldn't find anybody to move it. Luke and I discussed it, moving it to Hertford at the time, because I didn't have the store then. But they wanted it to stay in that county. So we just, forgot about it. And then I believe we were at the Greenbrier in West Virginia, but we saw a post and it was Preservation North Carolina saying, we need a hero. There's just one day left and the house is going to be stripped for architectural salvage and then it's going to be demolished. And so I said to Luke, I said, well, maybe I guess they'll let it go out of the county now. And but when I bought the general store, the family that sold me that said, there's a vacant lot across the street. They said it's a little over an acre. Do you want to buy that? And I thought, what do I need an acre lot? I mean, Bullock is a small cross section. It's very rural. There's nothing there. And I thought, what would I need a vacant lot? And then Luke said, Michelle, you never know. You could use it for parking if we decide to do something with all of this. I thought, yeah. And then the family said, you can have it for $4,000. And okay, I'm going to have to take it just because. But then when this cottage came along, I was like, okay, now it makes sense. And so we knew immediately
it was meant to be.
We can move it, but it's an hour between the two locations. There's no way we could move it whole. So Luke has dismantled houses before, and they literally take them apart, number each piece, number each room. And then we found a farmer that's going to let us store it at his barn in Bullock. So it's real close to where it needs to go.
I did a little research on this because I knew I was going to talk to you, and I was trying to find out as much as I could about this building or about this little cottage itself. And this is going to be its second move, from what I understand.
Right.
But apparently it was moved to that first farmland in 2008. The intention, as I understand it, was that they were going to put it back together at that time, but there just never was any money or there never was anything behind it to get that restoration done.
Yes. Yeah. So I believe the lady that had it moved, I think she's related to the owner of the property in some fashion. And so it was moved to that location whole, but it needed a proper foundation and all of that. But they never got around to it, so it just sat. And so then this farmer, he's like, I'm sick of looking at it. He even said, I'm sick of dealing with all of these preservation minded people. And he said, I want it gone. So he gave us an extension to get it taken down. But he was adamant with us too. He said, I just don't want to see like days go by and nobody's out here working on it, or I will come and, demolish it. So,
yes. So we did another episode with the printmakers in, and he had brought a house from Connecticut, I believe, and they did this.
Mhm.
They broke it down and did sort of a flat pack move. So this isn't the first time I had heard of dismantling it and moving it. But was the structure itself, because it's pretty small, I think it was only 1,300 square feet. Is it
Mhm.
just was it too, sort of rickety or too fragile to move in one piece? Because it was already up on blocks. I mean, what was the reasoning behind completely taking it apart?
I mean, it had to move an hour. So that's an
Yes.
hour of dealing with power lines
Gotcha.
and just
Okay.
all kinds of issues. And I mean, the structure itself wasn't in bad condition, but it just needed to be
Okay. Yeah.
dismantled. Yeah.
This was
And
just the
especially
Go
for
ahead.
us too, it's more secure dismantled than it would be just sitting again somewhere else on, cinder blocks. For us, it makes more sense to dismantle it, get it to a safe location. We then have plenty of time to figure out what we're going to do with the lot, what kind of foundation we're going to use, and all of that.
Yeah. That is a very good point and something that I didn't really think of because it was open to the elements in a lot of ways. Luckily, fairly safe on this farmer's property, but who knows, moving to a new location, what it would have been open to. So, yeah, good point. All good points that I never even really
And then
thought about.
us, and then now too, rebuilding it, they can replace any rotten wood that was in there. So it's going to be solidly rebuilt. And we keep as original as possible down to, I mean, just everything. So it will be a solid structure when we're done with it.
So, what does the process look like? I mean, I guess before you can dismantle it, you have to document everything. So, is that pictures? Is that drawings? Do you draw up new plans like an architect would? I don't even know how that process would work.
I mean, we took plenty of pictures, videos, but Luke is just very good at what he does, and especially with the way he numbered things. Like it's, parlor, left window one, just it's
Right.
just all over the place how he numbers it.
Such a fascinating process to me. I've done several house moving stories on this podcast, and every time I just really get into it because I'm always like, how do they do that? And every now and then I bring this up to my husband. I say, we should move a house. And he goes back and forth. Sometimes he says, oh, that sounds horrible. And other times he's like, yeah, we should do that. So I think I'm sort of close to convincing him at some point that moving a house would be really, really okay, or it would be doable. I just think sometimes he thinks it sounds very daunting, which, I mean, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's got to be complicated. So you're planning to move it across the street from the store. What does the timeline for that look like?
I mean, we need to have the soil perked. I mean, there's just different things we need to do, and that's a tree lot. So there's lots of trees over there. But I mean, it'll take time, and then we do have other projects, so we're just constantly moving around.
So, yeah, and this happened really, really fast. So I guess you
It
weren't
did.
thinking, okay, I'm going to build a house and we're going to have it as an Airbnb. Like you weren't even
Yeah.
there yet. You were
Yeah.
just like, I got to go in and dismantle this house and get it off a farmer's property. It's really soon. I realized I've got you interviewing right after this just happened. But now that you're kind of in the middle of it, do you see yourself doing this again?
I would never say never, but when I bought the house, the cottage and store, and then that empty lot, we were doing a video. Luke and I were in the store. My daughter does all filming for us. And I said, you know what we should do? I said, we should create a little village out here, like a little historic village where kids could come and look at how an old store would have looked. And so now we have that coastal cottage going out there.
Yes.
And then we had somebody in Stovall, North Carolina, reach out and said they had an old kitchen house that they wanted to, I guess, donate. So we're going to move that next. So there's that.
Wow. So you're already thinking about doing it again. When
Yeah.
you get involved in things like this or when you buy up these houses, are there ever any sort of preservation regulations or local politics that you have to navigate or that make things a little sticky sometimes? I mean, you seem like the kind of person who can really make it work, but just curious.
Pretty much all the houses I have are in different historic districts, except for the old general store and cottage. But we keep things original, so we don't ever really have any issues with, the politics of it or somebody saying you can't do that because we just keep everything original. But that's usually what most people run into is dealing with historic districts or preservation societies that, don't want you changing out your windows.
Right, right. Yeah, that's not an issue for you. Going back to the Altman house, there's a video online that shows a little bit of that marbling on the
Yes.
wainscoting. And I thought that was really neat too. So I'm going to post that in the show notes and basically anything that I found. And if you have something that you want me to share, you can send that to me and I can post some videos in the show or, links to videos on the show notes. But you found something in there that I just thought was so funny and probably it's probably one of the most unexpected finds that I've ever seen in the old house community. In the old house community. Yeah. So, okay, so you admit that it's kind of funny too. You're welcome to share what it is, or I would happily share what it is too. It's whatever your comfort level is.
So usually when we're working on projects, so Luke will go with his crew to wherever they're working, whether it be Saltville, Hertford, or the cottage. And I'm usually here in Danville working. And he texted me and he said, you won't believe what I just found. And so he sent me a picture of it. And it was just this little tin, like that big and round. And he said this. And I was like, okay, what am I looking at? And then he opened it and showed me a picture inside it. And I said, again, what am I looking at? And he said, that is a condom from 1920s. I said, wait, what? And there was one still.
Oh, I know. The remnants of one, yes.
And it said 3 to a package, and it was $1 for each package, and it said that they were reusable.
Oh, no. And that part I didn't catch.
Yes. So they didn't find one tin. They found 2 tins that were stuffed up in between the bedroom and the attic. And they fell out when they were taking the joist down. And then just last week, they found another one. So they found 3 of them. And that would have been expensive back then. But they were reusable, so...
They were called, I think the brand was what, like Merry Widow or something like that? Which I thought was pretty funny. Yes. If anybody wants to Google that or Google Lens Merry Widow packaging, I think you'll get a good laugh. I thought it was very funny. The name and why it was called that. And also, yeah, there's some pictures on Facebook of the packaging that you're the little tin that you found and also the contents inside, which are just as kind of gross as you think they might be.
It was just, we had never seen that.
No, but I like to know that people were really taking care of their health at that point. So
yes.
Good to know. Yeah. Little family planning in the 1920s. Now, excellent.
Now we did find out some really interesting history about that cottage that I haven't shared anywhere yet, if you want to hear that.
I would love to hear it. Yes.
So the house was owned by Alfred and Elizabeth Altman. So at the time, they had like 800 something acres. They had 20 enslaved people. They lost 2 sons in the Civil War. And so it was right after the Civil War ended, Reconstruction was happening. So they lost all of their enslaved labor. They lost 2 sons. And so Elizabeth had to go to court with Alfred to take over guardianship over him. So for a woman, her husband, over her husband. So for a woman back then to take guardianship over her husband and the 800 acres and all of it, something significant had to have happened. So at the court proceeding, he was declared a lunatic. But a lunatic back then isn't the same as what we would describe a lunatic. So back then it could have been anything from a stroke.
Right.
They specifically said alcoholism. I'm leaning towards alcoholism, that they lost the sons. He lost all of his wealth because he was considered back then probably net worth of like $600,000. Most of that was tied up in slaves and Confederate currency. And so after the war, it just all went away.
Right. That was the end of it.
And so it was unheard of for a woman back then to own that much property, but she would have to go to court every single year to show that she didn't squander any of her husband's money, his acreage. She would have to show where every single dime came from. And you could see where she was selling vegetables that she and her kids grew. Wow. So who knows what was going on actually. But she ended up dying a decade before him. And so I don't know if one of her adult sons took over guardianship then, but she held guardianship all the way up until she died.
That's a real complicated time in history, and a complicated history for her after the end of the Civil War as well. So, yeah.
And you have to think she kept that house standing, their farm running, but it's sad to see her headstone. All it just says is her name, wife of Alfred Altman, her birth and her death. Like, it didn't mention any of the other stuff. It was just wife of Alfred Altman. Yet she kept that entire farm and house together.
Are they buried nearby?
I believe so. Near where the cottage sits now, yes.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Thanks for sharing that history. Well, I feel like I got insider information.
Yeah.
You own all these properties. Are you just keep doing what you're doing until you don't want to do it anymore? Or do you kind of have a vision for how this is going or what you're going to do with all of these properties at some point?
Well, every time I buy one, or like the Alfred Altman cottage, we didn't pay anything for that. Preservation North Carolina waived that fee because they just need somebody to come in and save it. But every time I get a new property, I think to myself, okay, this is it. This is it. But then something usually comes along. So I won't ever say never again. We have the main house. We live here in Danville, and then we go to the mountains or we go out to the coast. So it's it keeps things interesting.
You're enjoying all of them. Now, obviously, I mean, I would say you would definitely want your sister back. But since she's not, and you have done this sort of in her honor, do you think that she would be happy that you're doing this?
Oh, I think she'd just be thrilled by it all. Yeah, I think she'd be thrilled by it.
Well, before we wrap up, is there anything about Old House life or about the Altman Cottage or about anything that we talked about today that we didn't cover that you would want listeners to understand or to know?
There's something about an old house, like you won't find that character in new houses or in the vinyl flooring,
Yeah.
the vinyl siding. I mean, they're a breed of their own.
And Old House life is all over the internet, but where would the best place be for people to follow along or subscribe to what you have on the internet?
Well, I have my website, but I post primarily over on Facebook, like all of our restoration projects, videos primarily go on Facebook. So either through me, Old House Life, or through Ramsey Restoration, because he posts stuff that I don't post.
Ramsey Restoration on Facebook or Old House Life on Facebook. And then the website is actually The Old House Life. Is that correct?
Right.
TheOldHouseLife.com. Okay, and we'll get those in the show notes on the website so that people can follow along. Michelle, thank you so much. I really loved getting to know you and hearing your story, and I'm glad you were able to make time to come on the show and tell us more about everything that you're doing.
It was nice meeting you.
So after talking with Michelle, I keep coming back to this idea of deal breakers and how much they shift, depending on the person, the timing, and the house. At the beginning of the episode, we were looking at this in a really clean way, lists and categories, what people think they would or wouldn't take on. And then, I heard Michelle's story and it gets a little less tidy. Some of the things that might seem like a hard no at first glance become possible with the right mindset or the right experience, or sometimes just the willingness to try. I know my mind has certainly been changed after hearing stories here on True Tales from Old Houses. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't real deal breakers. There are. Budget is real, time is real, energy is real. But I do think it's worth asking, is something a true deal breaker or is it just unfamiliar? Because those are not the same thing. And I've seen this over and over again. Sometimes the thing that feels the most intimidating at the beginning becomes the thing you're most proud of figuring out later. I also want to mention that when I asked that question on Facebook and Instagram, I heard story after story from people who passed on 2, 3, even 4 old houses because of their circumstances or ability to take on a project at that time. Some eventually found their house and some are still looking. And it's a good reminder that there isn't one right old house. It really comes down to what a person is willing or able to take on at that moment in their life. And Michelle's story reflects that too. So if you're out there looking or even just dreaming about an old house, it might be worth revisiting your own list, because what feels like a deal breaker today might not always be one. And just a reminder that if you want to see how all of this shook out in the responses that I got, the pie charts and a few more observations, that will all be on Substack on Thursday. Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and thank you to our sponsors, Sutherland Wells, Brouns & Co. Linseed Oil Paint, Heritage Supply Co., and Repaint Studios. To continue the conversation, follow True Tales from Old Houses and me at Blake Hill House on Instagram, and subscribe to Notes from an Old House on Substack. Check the show notes where you're listening right now for a direct link. If today's episode has you thinking, okay, maybe I could handle that, I want to hear about it. Instagram, Substack, email, the voicemail button on the website, I check them all. And before you go, I do need just a little quick favor. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating or review wherever you're listening. It's free. It takes about 30 seconds, and it helps more Old House people find the show. Also, hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Take care of your old houses and each other. Until next time.